Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fortress of Solitude. Today we're going to be checking out Action Comics issue 1067 by Gail Simone, Eddie Barrows, Rainbow Rowell, and Sian Tormey. In the wake of the House of Brainiac event, the Superman Superstars initiative returns to Action Comics as Gail Simone takes over the book for a 3-part arc. An arc that throws us back into the early days of Superman's career, planting us firmly in a late 60s, early 70s version of Metropolis and with characters from that era. Lois, Clark, and Jimmy aren't working for the Daily Planet, they're working for WGBS News, something which the comics did try out, I think a number of times actually, but it never really caught on. It was just sort of like an initiative to try and modernize the Daily Planet, but you can't really modernize something if it ain't broke. The three reporters find themselves talking with, I believe, Jefferson Pierce. His first name is never revealed, but from the way he dresses to his actions in the book, it definitely feels a lot like Jefferson Pierce, as the man is running a youth center in danger of being shut down. I really like the dynamic that Gail has with this version of the characters, specifically Clark and Lois. This is Lois years before she finds out that Clark is Superman, so they have a great rivalry in their jobs, trying to outdo each other in the newsroom sort of thing. Something we've seen countless times, and it's always really fun when it happens. And really, it's something that they've kind of lost once they kind of got together and married as well. They've kind of lost that rivalry. There's still that sort of, cheeky banter between them, but there's not something like we see in this book where Lois is actively trying to get one up on Clark and scoop him on his story, which she ends up doing, as while Clark is giving Mr. Pierce some softball questions, Lois has the actual story, discovering that the building inspector was actually paid off by the center's landlord Horace Brewood, who wants to knock down the building and sell it off to gentrifiers. While Lois is digging up more on this story, Clark disappears as an alien invasion soon begins, and a group of insectoid aliens teleport down and attack Mr. Pierce when he tries to defend his neighborhood. Pierce's heroics cause his friends to come to his aid, and Superman finally shows up to lend a hand. Being the story is set in the past, artist Eddie Barrows has redesigned Superman's suit, bringing it back to a more classic Fleischer cartoon-inspired costume with the black back S crest and yellow outline, and it's one of my favorite looks on Superman, and along with all of the other characters dressing in very late 60s, early 70s-ish attire, it helps kind of signpost the story that this is an earlier setting in the timeline. Superman attacks the aliens and soon meets their supposed leader, a man named Zolt of the Stahl people. Zolt explains that he's part of the huge armada that has suddenly appeared in Earth's orbit, and it's what Clark saw earlier that made him leave the area. We learn that Zolt is actually a diplomat wanting to meet Superman, so they followed Lois, Clark, and Jimmy, the three journalists who knew the hero the most. And the bug aliens who are with him are actually Zolt's captors. And it turns out Zolt's people have no actual concept of war and can't actually wage it, believing that their sheer numbers and groups of other aliens who have joined their massive universe-spanning treaty would help them warn off conquerors. But the insectoid race, the Gorathians, joined the treaty and betrayed them and kind of took charge of everything. So Gail goes over quite a fair bit of story here, and even for someone like me, there's quite a fair bit, and it's just 4 straight pages of exposition, and that's not even half of the story that's relayed here, since between invading armies, diplomat races holding other races captive, all that sort of stuff, we also learn that the Goranthians have instigated the Games, a brutal combat sport that every other race in Zolt's treaty couldn't have a hope to win because they aren't suited for war, where the Gorathians are, and if they end up winning, all of the other races lose their planets and resources and then forfeit the Games and are wiped out, which is something the Gorathians seem to want to happen. Of course, the Gorathians' leader, Gunhar, tries to convince Superman that Zolt is wrong and that they are the Stahl people's protectors and they're there looking after them. Very obvious he's the villain of the story, but I like that he's still trying to convince Superman that, he's the good guy, he's the good guy, he's the good guy in all of this, and Zolt is the bad guy, and you shouldn't listen to him. But of course, Superman knows better and decides to try and negotiate fight with the Garanthians, and I like what he does here because he just eats one of the soldiers' laser guns when he threatens Zolt with it. This part really stood out to me, something that you'd see in, the 60s, 70s era of Superman comics, where they had all of those really wonderful covers of you'd see stuff like Jimmy and Robin being forced to dig their own graves by Superman and Batman, or like Superman eating kryptonite and commenting how it needs some salt. Stuff like that you'd see in Golden Age era comics, and I like that this is very much something that you'd see in a Golden Age comic. Superman eating a gun, and because of course he's Superman, he can just do that, and that's part of his negotiation tactics. It's really funny, and I like that Gail Simone went there. It's totally a Gail Simone thing to do. Superman is then challenged by Gunha thanks to defending Zolt, and the hero accepts the challenge, giving the grace of bringing 2 other people with him as his backup. And while Superman thinks of bringing people like Batman and Wonder Woman, thanks to a kind of misunderstanding or kind of Gunha taking everything kind of literally, he believes that Superman actually means the 2 people there with him, Lois and Jimmy, teleporting them all onto their chosen battlefield, which is the USS Battle Creek, a state-of-the-art supercarrier that Gunha has abducted and has sent floating half a mile above Metropolis. He of course assures Superman that if he wins, he'll let the ship go and return it to where it came from. And I think this is such a really cool setting for a big battle, and it feels like something out of an anime, like a big anime, Cell Games arena type thing. And it gets even better since Superman is forced to fight a giant monster called Galalox the Handsome, which isn't a fitting name at all because it's just this big writhing mass of tentacles. It looks terrifying, and Superman battles the giant alien, and it is again something that feels very 1970s. Superman has to stand up to a challenge by the villain of the book, and he has to fight an alien or something. Very 1970s Superman era type story, and it kind of makes sense that how Gail structured the book, where the first couple of pages were so exposition heavy just to sort of get that out of the way, so then you can have all of the rest of the pages be about Superman fighting a giant monster. During the fight, Superman finds that the monster is more than it seems, as it can torment him with psychic attacks, but he manages to fight through it to literally wrap the monster in its own tentacles and toss it to the ground, defeated. Thanks to Superman winning, Grunha concedes in his challenge for now, although he's a little literal with his rules, since before he did agree to let the supercarrier go once the fight was over, and he does, releasing his grip on it and letting it fall towards Metropolis, leaving Superman to try and figure out how to stop it, since he has no idea how to stop something so big. This was quite a neat cliffhanger, since you just kind of expect Superman to just grab the ship and, lift it up. Yeah, it's nothing for modern Superman. This is, the 1960s, 70s Superman who's a little less stronger than the modern day Superman, so lifting something that's 80,000 tons isn't something he's ever done before or ever tried to do. So I like that he's now been put into a position where it's like, oh, what do I do now? How do I save both the city and the aircraft carrier? It's a unique predicament, and I have a feeling that this is actually the test that Grunha was going to put him up against, just to see if he is worthy of being a champion for Zolt and for fighting on their behalf, if he can do this. And the villain also being a man of his word and getting to destroy the city via technicality is kind of cool as well. He did let go of the ship. He did promise to do that, and he did exactly that. You just didn't specify how he was going to let go of the ship. A lot of fun, and I really like Gail is playing with those types of tropes with villains. There is a lot of build up to Grunha though, and I really wish he was a little bit more present in the book. He's there around, he's kind of standing there in the background of some shots and everything, but I wish he was a bit more forthright in how he presented himself, since it's sort of Zolt in the first half of the book, and then Zolt just kind of ups and disappears once Superman agrees to fight, which, come to think about it, might be actually a story choice, since I could absolutely see a twist coming from Gail where Zolt's people are the ones who are the real captors and the evil aliens and the ones sort of manipulating everything in the background, since they kind of strike me as that they're sort of put on this sort of persona of like a weak race, and that kind of lures people into a false sense of security. And it's something we've seen before in comics, time and time again happen. And I'd like to see that played out here and see what kind of spin Gail would put on that. Gail's story is not the only one this issue, as Rainbow Rowell and Sian Tormey return to the present for a Lois and Clark centric storyline. The story sees Lois struggling with her job as editor-in-chief of the Daily Planet. Not because she can't handle the work, but because she feels like the job isn't suited for her. She doesn't like the big desks, the meetings, the fancy corner offices. It doesn't sit well with someone who's used to being, out on the streets as an investigative journalist. And because she has, the corner office and, the big oak desk and everything, she doesn't think that people respect her all that much, or respect her as much as they did when she was an investigative journalist. And of course, Clark, the ever supportive husband, reminds Lois that she needs not to try and be Perry. She doesn't need to try and emulate what he was doing in the job. She needs to just be herself, and whatever comes with that, making the job her own, basically. Clark's talk might have worked a little bit too well though, as he learns Atomic Skull is attacking Steelworks and rushes off to help fight the villain, with the new intern Mariposa believing that he's off covering the Superman story as he usually does. Clark's quick exit though makes Lois begin to question his role at the Daily Planet as Superman confronts Atomic Skull, asking a question that I'm sure he, and even me and probably everyone else who's been keeping up with Superman family stuff in the last couple of years, like, why is he attacking Steelworks? Atomic Skull is kind of a good guy at the moment, or at least he's trying to rehabilitate himself as a good guy. And really, this is kind of the weakest part of the book, because it's just kind of done just to show that Clark is off, being Superman, then coming back to the office to report on Superman. That's really all it's there for. I probably could have used a different villain, but I do like that, they actually addressed the fact that Atomic Skull was looking to be a hero, or looking to be a bit more of a good guy, more than a villain. And I like that they referenced that here, and it seems like they kind of forgot about that for a little bit in Action Comics and Superman. Sian Tormey's art for the story is clean and just looks really lovely. It's a real, easy on the eyes, and the fight with Atomic Skull, while only really one page long, is really well structured, and an artist will always get more points from me if they can work in Clark having to change into his Superman costume in the planet's storeroom before leaving the building. I always like when that happens, and I'm glad that Sian was able to work that in somewhere. As I said before, the fight is actually there to push the story of Lois and Clark forward a little bit, as Lois decides that once Clark is back at the planet, she is going to take him off the Superman beat and put the intern Mariposa on the Superman story instead. Lois reveals to Clark that with her in charge, there's a little bit of a conflict of interest between them and Clark, as Clark has spent time helping Atomic Skull's rehabilitation and helping Albert become a better man, but he can't write the story since there's an obvious conflict of interest. He's Superman as well. I love this type of drama. It's not manufactured in any way, and it feels very organic and in character since it's woven into both Lois and Clark's actual jobs. And really, it's a story that makes sense. Clark probably should not be writing about Superman, and Lois now in a position of power to ensure that doesn't happen and can make the news unbiased. Keep the news of the Daily Planet unbiased and fair. The new character Mariposa is interesting as well, since I get the feeling she's going to be used to highlight how biased Clark was in his reporting, and it won't be done in some mean-spirited takedown way of Clark that I'm sure some people are going to get all up in arms about. It's going to be done in a way where Clark realizes that, oh yeah, I kind of was being a little bit biased because I was telling my own adventures from my own point of view. That it's good to see like someone else's point of view, and I'm intrigued to see where Rainbow's going to take this character of Mariposa and how she is going to use her. And again, it would be great if the Daily Planet actually got a new member to their team as well. There's someone who actually is there to cover Superman stories and leaves Clark open to cover something else. I'd really be interested to see if this is like a move to make him into a different type of writer, a different type of journalist. The return of the Superman Superstars initiative was a welcome reprieve from books going from event to event like the Superman Ongoing is currently doing. Gail Simone sets up an interesting, if a little exposition-heavy main story with Superman, while Rainbow Rowell wonderfully explores the inter-office dramas of Lois and Clark at the Daily Planet. Combine both stories together in one book makes for a very well-rounded Superman experience. I'm going to give this issue an 8.5 out of 10.